Hi everyone, on behalf of the Southeast New England Program Network, welcome to our fourth webinar in the SNEP Network Climate Leadership Exchange series on smart growth and strategic zoning for livable communities. My name is Leah Soloway from the New England Environmental Finance Center, and I'm happy to be assisting with logistics for today's program. Today we will be engaging in a facilitated conversation with national leaders and showcasing the amazing work that is happening in the SNEP Leadership Exchange, which we will be learning about shortly. Before we get into that, there are a few logistics to keep in mind. First, everyone will be on mute to ensure audio quality. You'll be able to ask questions by typing them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We really look forward to answering questions, so please type them in at any time. Additionally, you can request a certificate of attendance for joining this webinar. Now for a little bit about the SNEP network. Here you can see a map of the Southeast New England Program region. The SNEP network's mission is to empower communities to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, and long-term climate resilience through the management of stormwater and restoration projects. This webinar series is one of the many ways we strive to serve the region. If you want to know more, you can check out snepnetwork.org for more information. On that note, I'd like to hand things over to Joanne Throwe, President of Throwe Environmental and Senior Fellow at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Joanne, please take it away.
Thanks, Leah. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And as Leah said, this is our fourth and our last exchange with Wareham in this leadership exchange through the SNEP network. We're really excited with the guests and the conversation we had this morning and share the highlights. At the end of this broadcast, we're going to talk a little bit about what's next for the Climate Leadership Exchange. But let's just jump right in. So today we're going to talk a little bit more. Our first event that we had when all of this started, we have incorporated green infrastructure. We've talked about waterfront redevelopment, resilience as a whole. We've incorporated finance into each of these conversations. So today we focus on smart growth. And hopefully everyone has already listened to the two podcasts that came out of this session from Ranson, West Virginia, and Warwick and RIPTA. You'll hear those to follow up. We also have Portland with us today. We've got some other guests from Smart Growth. So let me introduce those guests. Next slide. All right, first, let me introduce my amazing team. So I'm Joanne Throwe, Throwe Environmental, and working with me is Dan Nees, Center for Resilience Innovation, and also my partner over at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. We also have Kyle Gray, who you've probably heard on all the podcasts. He does an amazing job, and he is a research assistant and project manager with Throwe Environmental, working with SNEP. Next. So our project has been all about Wareham, Massachusetts, but so many of the great ideas coming from this leadership exchange are applicable in many of the communities that are listening to this broadcast. So we've had some closed exchanges with Wareham and then some podcasts, and then now these general webinar sessions that we share what came out of it. And representing Wareham is Kenneth Buckland from the town of Wareham, Director and Planning and Community Development Clerk there with the Redevelopment Authority. We also have been having Judith Weisside with Wareham and Peter Teitelbaum, who have been featured in along with many of the other Board of Selectmen and members of the Redevelopment Authority from Wareham, which we will take many of our recommendations, put them together in a report, and work with Wareham on moving these ideas forward. Next. So today, our guests include Nancy Gallinero. She is with the City of Portland, Maine. She is a water resource manager. We also have Edward Erfurt, who is with the City of Ranson, West Virginia. He's Assistant City Manager for Community Development. Emily Clifton, she is with the Low Impact Development Center. She's Associate Executive Director and just extraordinary planner. Next. We have Scott Avedisian. and he is with RIPTA right now. He is the CEO of their transit authority here in Rhode Island, but he is also former mayor of Warwick for many years, and so he's wearing a couple hats today. And we have Scott Wolf, who is Grow Smart America for Rhode Island, and he is executive director, and my goodness, he has so much to share with us. So let's jump right into this. Let's start with talking just briefly. Many of you have been with us all 4 sessions, but let's just take a minute. I'm actually asking Kyle to touch base on some highlights about Wareham and then some details about our communities, and we're going to go into a little Q&A. So Kyle?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joanne. And again, we see a lot of repeat attendees to these webinars, so we won't go into too much detail about Wareham or any of the case study communities today, but I invite you to look back to the podcast. Episode 0 specifically has all of the information about our work with Wareham, introducing our work in the exchange. So Wareham is one of the small communities right before you jump onto Cape Cod. It has about 22,000 residents, and that population doubles in the summer. A lot of the people coming through Wareham are on their way to Cape Cod, and one of the biggest things that the town is trying to work on is getting those visitors to stay in Wareham. You know, not just pass through and go to the Cape, but stay through and enjoy the town's 54 miles of coastline. So in this top image, you see Wareham Village. This is the area that the town is focusing their redevelopment on. It's a town-owned road right along the river that runs through town. There's a railroad that runs between the road and the river, so that poses some redevelopment challenges, but it also poses you know, some unique opportunities. In the bottom right photo, we see the Tremont Nail Factory, an old manufacturing facility that is, after the company moved out of Wareham, the facility is still there. And there, you know, there are many opportunities for redevelopment that could incorporate these historic assets into the town's vision moving forward. So with that, I'd like to go right into the case studies, if we could move to the next slide. And the approach that we've taken throughout this entire exchange is to focus each webinar and the subsequent podcasts on a specific theme. So today's smart growth and strategic zoning. And we bring in a number of different case study communities and organizations to really highlight the work that they've done. So today, as you know, we have Portland, Maine, Ranson, West Virginia, Warwick, Rhode Island, and the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, the LID Center in Beltsville, Maryland, and Grow Smart Rhode Island in Providence. So we can start off with Portland, Maine. So the work going on in Portland, Maine is, you know, it makes it a really attractive case study for not only the SNAP network, but across the country. We could have fit them in any one of our webinars. It just so happened that they ended up in the smart growth one. But the work that they're doing really covers a number of different fronts. On smart growth and strategic zoning, you know, they're doing a lot of work that makes their community more livable, more walkable, open to mixed use development, making sure that the waterfront stays strong, and, you know, making sure the core of the city is nice and robust, while still considering that neighborhoods nearby are being strengthened, and, you know, new development is being pursued within the vision for the town. And they're doing this through the Portland's Plan 2030, which is the new comprehensive plan, as well as Recode Portland, which completely revamped the town's land use code recently. So we can go to the next slide. And this brings us to Ranson, West Virginia. Ranson, again, is another case study that really shines through on smart growth. The town has pretty much doubled down on smart growth and strategic zoning. They recently embarked on their smart code, which is a form-based code similar to Portland. It revamps the land use code in the city, and it focuses less on the specific use of buildings and parcels and more on how those buildings and parcels fit in with the image of the town and this vision that they're trying to create for the future. On the picture on the right, you'll see the green corridor, which is along Fairfax Boulevard. It links the city of Ranson as well as the city of Charlestown. And it really serves to connect the different areas around the green corridor, make development, you know, in the nearby areas cohesive and feel all like it's one, you know, smart growth, kind of green space oriented part of the city. So we can go to the next slide. And this brings us to the Low Impact Development Center. So it's a nonprofit in Beltsville, Maryland. And the LID Center does a lot of work focusing on green infrastructure and low impact development pilot projects. They do training, education programs, you name it. And they do a lot of work around this region and in the Washington, D.C. area as well. So in the top photo, we see a project from Hyattsville, Maryland. the center worked with the municipality on some municipal land to institute a pilot project to show how a gravel wetland system could serve as a sort of green infrastructure BMP for the town. In the bottom left, we see an example from Prince George's County. So the LID Center worked with the county on its on one of its stormwater programs. So they have a fee where property owners are charged for impermeable surface, and instead of just paying this fee, property owners have the opportunity to get a rebate for the fee by implementing green infrastructure or low impact development. So with this program, the LID Center worked with local landscapers to train them on how to incorporate these LID practices so that property owners could really take advantage of this rebate opportunity. And in the bottom right, we see the Green Highways project that was with the District of Columbia. The LID Center worked with the DC DOT to showcase how green highways could work throughout the city, doing pilot projects, studies, and conducting research afterwards to see about their effectiveness. Next slide, please. All right, so we have my hometown, Warwick, Rhode Island. So Warwick is the second largest city in the state of Rhode Island, and it is home to the state airport, a community college, a hospital, 2 interstates run right through the town. So, there's a lot of different assets in the town, and several of them are specifically transportation oriented. So it only makes sense that transit oriented development was the lens through which Warwick decided to pursue its smart growth. So in the top left photo, you'll see kind of a schematic drawn up for City Center Warwick, which is this initiative that sought to link not only the airport, but also the rail station that's nearby, and develop parcels nearby and redevelop existing parcels to really fit within this image of a center of Warwick that was based on transportation and accommodations for people coming in to visit. We have the mayor of Warwick with us today. He served in the town for 18 years, and now he's over at the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. So in the bottom, we have a photo of some of Ripta's work. And, I think having the Transit Authority here is a great opportunity to highlight how transportation will be foundational, for long-term planning and these smart growth initiatives across the state of Rhode Island. Next slide. And finally, we have Grow Smart Rhode Island. So it is a Rhode Island-based nonprofit in Providence that, as its name states, really works to further smart growth in the state of Rhode Island and throughout the municipalities in the state. They put on a biannual Power of Place Summit that really works to bring together a number of different regional and national leaders on conferences related to different themes on smart growth. They hand out smart growth awards recognizing leaders at the state and municipal levels throughout Rhode Island, and they also have policy guides to inform business owners, state leaders, and residents within the state how smart growth initiatives are being moved forward in the state of Rhode Island, and how these residents and leaders can get behind these initiatives. So enough from me. These are some great case studies that we have, and we'd love to hear from all of the leaders that we have with us.
Thanks, Kyle. Great summary. And actually, I'm not going to let you go yet, Kyle, and I'm going to ask Dan as well. There's a few takeaways that I had this morning, and I'm sure both of you, Dan and Kyle, had a few this morning from the conversation. There was so much information to share, but a couple of key points were, from my perspective, there was something about the pressure of development, the pressure for development in urban sprawl. And, I make note of the fact that, focus on doing development well, building wealth, and maximizing value per acre. From Ranson's perspective, they had said no to more projects than they said yes to. And I'm going to ask Edward pretty soon to elaborate a little bit more on that. But I had another takeaway, which was adding diversity of development and uses is fiscally responsible and offers large returns. And, that is definitely a highlight. And so, Kyle, I'm wondering, how about your takeaways from this morning?
Yeah, we heard, a lot of key points from a number of different guests, and they all kind of crossed over. So that was great to hear. They all kind of mixed together. I heard that it's important to assess your successes periodically, reconsider them, against your goals and your visions, how everything's stacking up and what's working, what's not, and then adjust as needed. You have to be flexible. You can't just stick with one vision and move forward without ever looking back. You have to, consistently reassess what you're doing. And something else I heard was that, there are so many different approaches to smart growth, whether it's the transit-oriented development that we see in Warwick, Rhode Island, whether it's mixed use that Wareham's trying to pursue, or the complete streets that we've seen across Cape Cod in our work there and through the SNEP network. It's important to be creative and find what works for your community. So not every approach is going to work for every community, and one community can't do everything. So it's important to find what fits within the character of your town and what your community can really excel at.
Thanks, Kyle. How about you, Dan? Any takeaways from this morning?
Yeah, I guess a couple. The first is, so I've done as a lot of us have in this webinar, have focused a lot of our time over the past few years on the impacts of smart growth and low impact development. And there's always been this dichotomy that smart growth is actually no growth and growth is growth. And I think what we're seeing is that that's just not the case, that if you grow right, you grow in the right place, you make it look in the right form, incorporate environmental amenities, that it's actually a very solid economic and fiscal policy for communities to take. And I was really struck by Ranson specifically and Edward's discussion about what's going on there, that clearly it is not just an environmental movement, it's an economic and movement, and growth and controlled growth can exist and coexist very effectively for communities. But I think the key word for me throughout this exchange, and also the other three exchanges, is integration. We are getting to a point where we can no longer address key community environmental and infrastructure needs in a vacuum, and that we have to integrate things together. So we saw how that's coming together in Portland on the water side, coupling different environmental regulations and policies together with water. But we're also seeing it in places like Warwick, where they're incorporating economic growth and development with transportation. We saw it again in Ranson, where we're looking at form and how to kind of drive communities towards how things are going to be built, and then connecting that to the economy. And I just think that this has real impact for the town of Wareham, that you can be holistic, you can be targeted to what you want your community to really look like, and all of that done the right way, it is genuine economic policy and good policy, and that has genuine impact on what I work mostly on, which is the financing and tax policy in communities and diversification. And what we get are just genuine, resilient communities. So all that kind of came together for me in this call this morning.
Thanks, Dan. And you mentioned integration, and I think, this is the point, Nancy, for Portland. I want to go into that a little more, because I feel like our listening audience will really want to hear more about your integrated water resources planning, your plan, and really talk about some of the challenges you had in incorporating LID into your strategy, and explain that process to us to get us started.
Sure, thank you, Joanne and Kyle, for including me in this morning and highlighting Portland. We're pretty excited about where we are right now. We have finished our integrated plan, which takes about 2 years if you do it right, and then you include all of your stakeholders, your public and your internal stakeholders. And we set out on this path specifically to really look holistically at everything that was going on in the city, and to make sure that water quality, social justice issues and economic issues, development issues, all of those things were included in our process to make sure that we were addressing water quality throughout. The integrated plan itself this time last year was codified in the Clean Water Act. So it is now something that is, you don't have to do it, but it is considered. And I think in the future it will be considered when financing is available on a federal level. I think it will be insisted upon, because it forces you to really evaluate your projects and see where they fit into the big scheme, and if they really are the best projects for you. It was interesting when we had our stakeholder group, our environmental groups, and our internal groups, and our engineer people, and just every kind of walk of life that we have in the city together, and we evaluated a host of projects, nearly over 100 projects, that low impact development, green infrastructure all rose to the top, that it's something that everybody is interested in doing, that it can be applied even in our communities that are maybe disenfranchised or are not necessarily getting the attention that other parts of the city are with green space. It allows us to really look at this, just take everything into consideration. We've really not gotten any resistance. I think the challenge for all municipalities that are implementing green infrastructure is making sure that it's the right application, that they're actually working, as you've already discussed, that you're evaluating those on a regular basis. And also the new technology, making sure that new technology is coming in. But also there's a pretty extensive cost to maintaining green infrastructure. And I know some municipalities are really looking at, are the extravagant pieces really necessary? I know one utility in Massachusetts actually said, why am I putting all these plants in? If you just put grass there, I can cut it. I can just mow it. I don't have to have, a special contract to have somebody come in and replant and do all these things. And they said, well, I don't know, maybe it would work. And so they put grass in, and you know what, it worked. So it's something that I think, we're just going to, as time evolves, we're just finding that, why not look at these practices at each site and get really good at it and stop spending an exorbitant amount of money on gray infrastructure that may or may not necessarily be needed. So we're excited about it. I happen to have engineers on staff that are really innovative and looking at new ways. We incorporated green roofs into our stormwater program that were not initially there. We're looking at perhaps offering some credits to community members to install. We have credits for people who install green infrastructure on their own personal property. However, the cost of doing so isn't really worth it over the long haul because the rates are so low anyway. So we're wanting to incentivize that more, even in a community level versus just development, large development packages. So it's pretty interesting, and I love the integrated approach because it brings people together. It opens their mind. It allows them to think outside the box, understand that it's not all about them. I mean, we love development, but we want to do it in a wise way that protects our most valuable resource, which is our water. And we have 6 impaired waters. We have Casco Bay. We have a small harbor that's really has all of our CSOs, or combined sewer overflows, that we're protecting now, and with some large infrastructure projects. So we want to protect that. It's the most important thing that we have, both from a commercial perspective as well as tourist industry. So yeah, those are kind of our focuses.
Thank you, Nancy. Great example. All right, so Edward, I'm going to shift over to Ranson, West Virginia. And so my key takeaway was this morning, you said something that was just so important to us to hear. You say no to more projects than you say yes to. So talk a little bit more in detail about the pressure of development and sprawl in Ranson and what's going on there.
Yeah, so Ranson, West Virginia, we are 40 miles from the Dulles International Airport, and we are at the far eastern area, essentially a bedroom community of the DC market. It is a lot easier to develop in West Virginia than Maryland and Virginia. So we get a lot of drive to qualify buyers coming out here because they can buy excuse me, a production home in our market that's $100,000 to $200,000 cheaper than the exact same home in Maryland and Virginia. So we have a lot of development pressure where people want to come into West Virginia to develop. And West Virginia does not have a lot of zoning and development codes. We're one of the few communities that have that. Our council is pro-growth, so they want to see development and investment occur, but they, as part of that, their trade-off is to make sure that it's within the vision of the city. So we get lots of development that comes through that is sprawl in the most general terms, or it's inconsistent with the community it wants to go in. And we have to say no to those projects, and we use the code to show that. We have a form-based code, so the zoning code is not as interested in the uses, it's interested in the built form. And it's a very simple code. The complexity is getting the development community that thought they could do something that does not fit in the community in. So we work through that code. It's a lot of hands-on, trying to show them how the developments work. and we do have to say no to projects, but we counter that. My background is in architecture and planning, so we sit there with markers and we figure out how to make the project and program work on the site. And in many times, when they realize that they don't have to do big landscape buffers and they can build to the street and utilize on-street parking, use some innovative stormwater approaches, they end up with extra land. And we use that to land bank for future development. And we help to guide them where those pad sites are, which is leading to increased value in our community. We're also finding that, as with the traditional town, having a mix of uses, it makes us a lot more resilient to the ebbs and flows of the economy. Allows people more, a lower bar of entry for people to enter to participate in our market, which has led to Ransome holding economic value even through the big market downturns. And it continues. So when our development is constructed here, regardless, it contributes to the community. So the residents get excited because something new is coming in that it emulates what the rest of the town is and builds that value in each development.
Thank you, Edward. I'm going to switch over to Scott Avedisian. Scott, this morning we talked to you more about your role as mayor, but we didn't talk enough about your role with RIPTA. And so with that, I have a key question for you. Want to talk about your work as it relates to the transit serve. How does the transit serve as the foundation for future redevelopment in Rhode Island? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this today. Let me just tell you, like in this pandemic, prior to last March, we were moving about 59,000 people a day. We are now about half of that. But what we can tell you is what we've been able to do in the last 8 or 9 months is really identify who our audience is and who has either made the decision to take transit because they know it's better for the environment and it's convenient and effective for them, or people who are transit dependent. So we've really been able to take the last bit of time to try to really define what routes are good, which ones still have good service, which ones, where are we moving people who are going to hospitals, going to urgent care centers, who are the people that we are moving? And so therefore we can try to plan further development of service based on who our core ridership is. We'd love to have, riders of choice come into the system. I just don't think that this is a time in which we're going to see that. We're probably going to see people shy away from mass transit if they have other opportunities that they can avail themselves of right now. So what we've really looked at, which routes, we have a very successful R line, which is our rapid line, which connects Broad Street down from the Broad Street, Cranston, Providence City line all the way through into Pawtucket. And it's got one of the highest ridership amounts of traffic that we need to create more of them. So we're now looking at redeveloping Elmwood Avenue into another R line to increase the downtown transit connector, which we opened, of course, 2 weeks before the virus hit. And we had 2 weeks where we saw great growth, and we were very excited about the numbers of riders that we were seeing. And that basically is a series of stops between Rhode Island Hospital and Providence train station, where you never wait more than 5 minutes for a bus. So what we've tried to do in the last year is look at where can our service be effective and where can we have very short headways so that we can really make sure that it's convenient and effective for the people who are our passengers. So we see downtown Providence as one of the most logical places to put more infrastructure and to put more service because of the number of people that we're moving. And so we've done a little bit of, well, not a little bit, a lot of 10 months of research into what routes really work. And, there were some routes here that were always considered sacred cows. You had to have them. that we're not moving anyone on. And so we need to redeploy those resources into places where they're going to be much more effective, so that we can look at where is further development going to happen and how can we be part of that discussion. So like in Wareham, we are, for a seasonal community like that, we have been working in the last few months with some of our coastal communities to talk about overcrowding in the summer. What can we do that we can move people in a seasonal way so we could augment, the regular service that we run by moving people, say, to Wareham, to just in a seasonal basis, so that we know that probably in the winter there's not going to be that market. But what can we do to change our service seasonally so that we can better serve the people who want to move somewhere?
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. That's terrific. Emily, I'm going to switch gears to you. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that come up when a community includes low impact development in its smart growth strategy, and how can these challenges be managed or alleviated? And maybe you could speak a little bit to the Prince George's County example, or connecting, local jobs and the local economy.
Sure. Yeah, I do want to go back and reiterate what Nancy brought up previously about that integrated water resources management plan. Having a starting point where you're really looking at opportunities both for low impact development or green infrastructure implementation, combined with all the other water resource needs of the communities, is a really important first step. That continued coordination between agencies and departments is very important. Those abilities to meet over time and analyze how you're doing over time. You mentioned the growth. So here at Low Impact Development Center works throughout the country, but I'd say in the last 4 or 5 years, we've really focused in on our home county, which is Prince George's County, just because there's a great amount of need in the Chesapeake Bay area to meet the stormwater permit obligations that are really challenging for these communities, as well as meet their other community needs. So in the county, Prince George's County in particular, there has been a big focus on jobs and the ability of green infrastructure to attract and create jobs for people. So the training that Kyle mentioned earlier, that's like one small aspect of it. It's like an intro almost for landscape designers and landscape architects into what green infrastructure is, and we focus on those that are most likely to bring contractors to a private owner, so rain gardens, permeable pavements, things like that. They also have a public-private partnership there that is really focused on job creation and the use of local firms within Prince George's County. They've been really very good at helping smaller startups to form and get trained on how to run effectively run their burgeoning businesses and all of that stuff, as well as all of the technical expertise they need to know about specifically for low impact development. I think that's probably every community here. It has been a challenge over time to have those qualified firms from start, beginning to end for green infrastructure implementation. So that's was identified early on in Prince George's County as a need. They have the public-private partnership itself. It has, every agency is supposed to meet a 40% goal of local business involvement. The public-private partnership has exceeded that goal every year because they've focused so much on building these local businesses. That's something that some of the other agencies within the county haven't achieved, but we're seeing more and more in this area, just that job growth development.
So important, especially during COVID, recovering from COVID. Thanks, Emily. Scott Wolf, My question to you, in your experience, how have communities similar to Wareham integrated smart growth into broader revitalization initiatives?
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with so many bright, dynamic folks. There are a variety of ways I've observed that communities have integrated smart growth tools and techniques into their redevelopment strategy. I think looking at your zoning and doing some of the kind of reforms that Ed has talked about in Ransom, West Virginia, is certainly one way. You want to, if you want to have a vibrant Main Street and downtown business district, you need to allow for mixed use development. You need to allow for a certain amount of density. Ideally, you're going to be promoting a complete street so that your streets are not only user-friendly for people driving cars, but also for people who are walking and biking. And I think that is particularly important in this current era and in the post-pandemic era that hopefully we will see soon, because there's a renewed appreciation and for being able to be outdoors and to enjoy the outdoors. And that should not just be limited to forests and beaches, but also to urban environments. So I think that's an important consideration in redevelopment. I think looking at your assets and figuring out what tools are available to invest in those assets in Rhode Island, at times anyway, the state historic tax credit has been a major catalyst for redevelopment. It's kind of operating on financial fumes right now, unfortunately. But I think also there's been a lot of discussion. I know there was a lot of discussion earlier about brownfields, and many of our older urban waterfront communities have significant brownfields, and those tend to be viewed understandably in the short run as liabilities, but they're often in a very strategic location. And if you can cobble together the strategy and the finances to clean them up, they often offer a great opportunity for redevelopment, for infill. There's the whole opportunity that Scott Abedesian has championed both at RIPTA and as former Mayor of Warwick, of transit-oriented development, and as an important part of a redevelopment strategy. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think one of the challenges in redevelopment is community engagement. We all talk about it. We all strive to achieve it. One of the ways we're trying to kind of enhance community engagement is to actually sponsor workshops for residents of specific communities about the whole land use decision-making process, because it's kind of arcane and inaccessible, at least because it's arcane to many people. So I don't think a lot of people in a community know about zoning boards and planning boards and conservation commissions and economic development commissions, and we can't expect them to be experts on those things, but we don't want them to be intimidated by that process. We want them to feel as though they can actually participate in it. And that's not a slam dunk. And that just doesn't happen automatically. And if we want a broader swath of people to be involved in that, including people of modest means and people who often feel they don't have a voice, then I think we have to make some really aggressive, proactive steps to help folks be effective change agents for their own communities. It's more than just posting a meeting and inviting people to it. That's certainly something that has to happen. But if you want to have a good cross section of people there, then there's got to be a little bit more rolling up of the sleeves and training. So those are some of the thoughts. I think one other thing is right now with the pandemic, we see a key to Main Street and downtown revitalization being to prop up our arts, our food, and our hospitality sector. I mean, obviously they've been devastated, and a lot of those businesses are the lifeblood of main streets and downtowns. We're not going to have healthy main streets and downtowns if we don't really put some special attention and resources into saving and revitalizing that sector of the economy.
Scott, well said. Thank you so much for those points. Kyle, I want to check in with you if we have any questions from our listeners.
I don't see anything from the audience yet. I definitely encourage them to come on in, but I do have one. I guess we can direct this to Scott Avedisian as with his former mayor hat. What kind of commitment does a city need to pursue smart growth? You know, we saw this in Warwick, but coming from the municipal level, what kind of commitment does a town need to put forward to make sure that this succeeds?
Well, I think there are numerous ways to answer that, but I think the best thing to do is to figure out right off the bat 4 or 5 projects that are low-hanging fruit. So when we started talking about LED lighting, everyone said, oh, it's going to be so expensive, you're never going to be able to maintain it, blah, 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 blah. And then we started to show what it actually took to change out traffic lights. And when you could make the case that they're a little more expensive, but the shelf life is so much better, that whole issue went away. There was no more argument anymore. Oh, he just wants to spend a lot of money. This is a crazy project. I think if you figure out 4 or 5 easy wins, you can get the critics to say, oh, maybe this actually does make sense. And then once you get them down, that's when we started bringing out the change in zoning for city center. So there were no setbacks, all the parking was in the back. You know, gas stations are not what attracts people to neighborhoods, so let's try to hide them as best we can. You know, and so when you came out with the second and third waves of that stuff, people started to say, oh, well, you know, they were right when they talked about the first group. Let's give them a chance. And then when you started to incorporate historic, you know, redevelopment of historic buildings and showed that you could keep the framework of the building existing and let people see that it wasn't this horrible thing that was going to happen to the Pontiac Mills. That, you know, the Pontiac Mills is a huge development. It was where Fruit of the Loom was actually born, and it had its heyday in the Civil War and then fell into real, you know, ruin. It's a beautiful mixed-use development now that protected all of the original buildings. But you build up that confidence with people when you do little projects to start, to show them what you can do and get their buy-in. And by the time that we get to the Pontiac project, the Pontiac Village Association was 100% in favor of everything that we were proposing to do, including a prefab hotel that was going to go in right on the Patuxent River, the first interior river redevelopment done in 40 some odd years. They embraced that, and there wasn't any negativity. And in fact, they were asking for more things to be built in the neighborhood so that they could be pretty much self-sufficient. But small wins show people that, one, you know what you're doing, and that it's not that change, because no one, as much as we say that change is good, no one ever believes that. You got to really lead them through the process of knowing that it's going to be okay by the time you're done. And small steps, I think, create a large army of people who are then advocates.
Scott, thanks. Kyle, I'm going to have you interrupt me if there are questions coming in. Otherwise, I want to turn to Nancy and ask her something. Are you okay? Nancy, you know, so Scott's comments about the small wins and you know, getting that community buy-in, and you've been really successful utilizing your stormwater utility fee. So I can't miss this opportunity for you to talk a little bit about that process and that community engagement, and you know what you've been able to do with your utility fee.
Sure. Well, first of all, our utility fee is $6.75 per 1,200 square feet of impervious surface. So that's what we charge. We are bringing in revenue over $6 million a year, which in large part has gone to supporting our large infrastructure projects that are separating our combined sewer, as well as building storage tanks around our most vulnerable waterway right now. So I think the success part, well, I'll address that in two parts. Small wins have been difficult to look at small wins because we had such a large demand on immediately to rectify a lot of past failures over our system and just getting in compliance with EPA and DEP regulations. So we didn't have a lot of small things that we could necessarily do. But I totally agree with what Scott said, that if you can do that, that's definitely the way to go. I can say that the stormwater group that established the stormwater utility really teed up for me to be able to then create the integrated plan, bringing a lot of those same people together. So I have to give them a lot of credit for doing that and for being patient enough to go through that process. Bringing people from diverse backgrounds together to be in consensus is not an organic process necessarily. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of patience, and you do have to show that you're dedicated to it and that you're serious about it and that it's going to result in something that's sustainable over a long period of time. So it's just, I think if I had any advice, it would be that just don't give up, to just stay with it and keep encouraging people and keep bringing them in and bringing them into the process. I have a water quality group that meets quarterly, and that's our goal, is to continue to build this integrated process and not let it just like, okay, we did that, now we're moving on. But no, it's a part of how we do business every day now. So.
Thanks, Nancy. So I'm going to follow up with a question for Scott Wolf on the financing. So thinking about financing approaches, and how have you found to be especially successful in pursuing smart growth, either Rhode Island or in other work that you have or case studies you've seen? Anything you could talk about there on financing approaches?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one of the sort of basic premises we operate on in trying to promote accelerated smart growth is that you need incentives, financial incentives, regulatory incentives, to maximize the potential for redevelopment in built-up areas. That if you don't have those special incentives, the default option often for development is sprawl style development. Develop on a greenfield. It's more expensive and complicated and time consuming to rehab a structure generally than to build new. So you do need incentives to really achieve the smart growth vision. And in Rhode Island, we at one point had the most ambitious and generous state historic tax credit in the country. And that has resulted over time in catalyzing close to $2 billion in private investment, mainly in our main streets in downtown, some of the projects like Pontiac Mills that Scott Avedisian mentioned. So that's been a great tool. It's operating on financial fumes right now, but there's another program called the Rebuild Rhode Island tax credit that is filling some of the gap in incenting historic rehab. Another tool we've seen work very well in Massachusetts, and we're trying to bring it to Rhode Island, is a tool to provide some financial assistance to enhance infrastructure to facilitate economic development projects, to expand sewer capacity, for example, and it's called Mass Works. And we in Rhode Island have adopted something called the Municipal Infrastructure Grant Program, and it's based on our observation that there are a lot of good, innovative economic development project ideas at the local level, but they often require some infrastructure improvement, even in built-up areas, in order to make them happen. And there usually isn't the financial resource at the local level for that infrastructure investment. So we think it's a good role for state government to incent that kind of development. It's going to benefit the state treasury as well as benefit the vitality of the locality. So that's another tool. Certainly state funding for brownfield redevelopment. Rhode Island has a pretty ambitious approach now to funding brownfield remediation, another expensive activity that often localities can't undertake on their own. So that's another important financial tool. Certainly in terms of housing, and especially affordable and workforce housing, there often have to be subsidies for those to pencil out. And a lot of our community development corporations put together elaborate packages of 8 to 10 different financing sources to make a mixed income or affordable housing project work. And we're trying to get, with the governor's support, we're trying to get the Rhode Island to allocate more state funds to the development of affordable and workforce housing, which we think is not just a social service. We think it's a key part of economic development. And that, that's another thing I often am frustrated by, is that there's with some folks, and it's a diminishing, I think, number of folks, there's a notion that housing and transit are not economic development, that they're social services. And yes, there's a social service element to them, but there's also a significant economic development element to them. And the more we can convince policymakers that those things are related to economic development, I think the more successful we're going to be in getting more adequate funding for those activities.
Thank you. Kyle, how are we doing?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in. We have we just got another one too. All right, let's jump to this one. What type of critical role can landscape architects play in these projects? It's obviously about putting the projects on the ground, and there's an economic component. So there's a number of different aspects in these projects. So maybe if Emily wants to speak to this, I know they did some work with the landscape architecture community.
Well, landscape design landscape architecture, I think, is very important for these projects. I'd say for a long time, a lot of what we would see in the field, and probably even still more than I'd like to admit, are some unattractive low impact development features going out and being put in place. It's very hard to get a community to engaged and excited about projects that have been designed too heavily by engineers without the input of good solid landscape design. From a landscape perspective, here in Maryland, for example, the way the stormwater permit or the guidance from the state goes, there's increasingly additional credit being given to using native plantings, providing habitat benefits and things like that. There's a lot to be said for good landscape design. It's also an opportunity to engage other parts of the communities. I've seen communities where, as part of the landscape design or as part of the BMP, it required a certain percentage of the cost to implement go to a local artist to incorporate local art into the whatever was being put on the ground. It's extremely impactful and a great way to encourage your community to get engaged and to stay engaged as far as low impact development goes.
Great. I'd like to also see if Edward has anything to add on that one. How is landscape design and some of these aesthetic improvements helped in Ranson? We have that green corridor running through town. How has that drawn people to that area of Ranson?
It's really important because we're utilizing the landscape in the green areas to convey and treat stormwater. And a storm pipe in the ground is not sexy, and I can't get elected officials to show up for a ribbon cutting for a pipe in the ground. But above ground features actually are exciting and enhance a corridor. And along the main corridor of Fairfax Boulevard, that's an 80-foot right-of-way that's a little less than a mile stretch of road. All of the stormwater is treated and maintained within that right-of-way with 2 very small outfall pipes. And the landscaping within that, it's very critical to have your landscape architects, your transportation engineers, and your public works directors all together on these decisions, because a successful stormwater area will look like a jungle. The plants will grow. So understanding which plants work, and it's a lot of testing to make sure you get the right plants and the right maintenance schedules for it. But we've seen an economic excitement occur with it. We've seen development occur alongside it. We actually have a homeowner that got into honeybees and has a little apiary, and that block on the corridor all those flowers are pollinated. It is the most brilliant block of the whole stretch. And it's because a guy has, you know, a couple bee nukes in his yard within 100 feet of it. But yeah, the landscaping that adds value to your development in your city.
Great. Thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and what I want to do is ask Ken Buckland. Ken, speaking from Wareham's perspective, you've been through, you know, 4 of these events, and you probably have different takeaways from each one. But in general, some thoughts for today and moving forward.
Well, this has been a great program, and I really appreciate what you guys have been able to put together, the SNEP network and Throwe Environmental, and all the participants that have been involved. This has been a topic of conversation in the town for the last 4 months. It's nice to know that there are a lot of other towns and cities that are dealing with the same issues we are and have been successful in addressing them in certain ways. Kind of things that got to learn were the public engagement, zoning, transit concepts, green infrastructure ideas, and financing, and thinking of a return on investment from a public perspective as to how we invest our time and resources and what we apply them to. We've already started on a couple of things in town, and I'm hoping that we can take some of the ideas we've gotten from here and address them in different ways and make something happen in the downtown. We've already started a shared street program, getting restaurants involved in outdoor dining, closing off alleyways to get them active and able to handle the COVID issues that come along with the issues we're dealing with. I think there are a lot of other good ideas in here as well too that we'll be looking at and thinking about how we connect to the waterfront and make the program the space so that there can be a lot more activity in the downtown.
So thanks, Ken. And honestly, it's been a pleasure working with Wareham as our first community in the leadership exchange. But I want to end this by thanking our guests today and talking about what's ahead. So our next step is to develop all of the recommendations that have come out of each of our closed sessions, our public webinars, and our podcasts as well, and then be able to share that with our listening audience, with the SNEP region. This is very important that we make sure these ideas are, of course, utilized by Wareham, but go much further. Our next thought process is to consider what happens with the leadership exchange. And this is where I reach out to all of you who are listening. We want to hear back from you. We want to know if there are communities out there who are interested in participating in our leadership exchange. We'd really like to know. So Wareham is our first, but we will be moving forward on this with the SNEP network, and we'd love to know how we could potentially help you and some of your issues. So please reach out to us. And with that, I'd like again to thank all our guests today. We appreciate your time. Thanks to all the people who have been on each of these webinars. We've truly enjoyed it. I want to thank my colleagues, certainly Dan and Kyle and the SNEP team. So we have other upcoming events. Please go to the network, the SNEP network website to check all of this information out. If you want to listen to any of the past podcasts, please do so. They are also on the snepnetwork.org website. Feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on this slide, and it's been a sincere pleasure to be part of this exchange and with this team. So with that, have a great rest of your afternoon and Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye all.